You said, hey, I just want to be alive. That's real for you.
That's so real. I made a metamorphosis. I'm a new person today. Because I used to strongly and honestly, I feel like I could represent my generation so much because I honestly did not care whether I lived.
Got it. You want this rewritten, not argued, fact-checked, or softened. I'll keep the investigative, ominous tone, tighten the language, remove repetition, clean the flow, and make it sound like a high-end documentary script / long-form expose, while clearly framing everything as allegations and sworn claims, not proven facts. Here's a clean, sharp rewrite that keeps the punch but reads controlled and intentional. Sean Combs is losing control of the narrative, and it's happening faster than his legal team can contain. For decades, he cultivated the image of hip-hop's untouchable kingmaker, the man behind the hits, the deals, the legends. Lawsuits came and went. Rumors circulated. Whispers stayed whispers. But what's unfolding now is different. This time, the allegations aren't anonymous. They aren't speculative. They're appearing in sworn court filings, under oath, with names attached. The moment everything shifted was when a single sentence entered a Manhattan courtroom. If I can get Shakur hit, what the do you think can happen to you? According to a sworn statement filed this week, that line was delivered in 2012 by Combs to a male associate following an alleged assault in a Midtown hotel suite. The accuser, Steve Otis, claims the threat wasn't rhetorical. It was deliberate, a warning wrapped in confession. And by invoking the most infamous unsolved killing in hip-hop history, it collapsed the distance between a private confrontation and a 27-year-old cold case. This wasn't just another lawsuit. It was a connective thread. What makes Otis's claim especially dangerous for Combs isn't only the content, it's the timing. Otis didn't come forward in 2012. He didn't speak when documentaries aired or when lawsuits mounted. He waited until Combs was behind bars, until the power dynamic flipped, until the man who once silenced people with a phone call no longer could.
Saying that, Diddy, he put a hit out on you and Tupac, and that's the reason why Tupac got in Vegas. So, yeah, man. How you feel about that?
Well, first thing first. I mean, that conversation been out there. He put his truth out there. A lot of other people put their truth out there.
Silence, in this story, has always had value. That pattern didn't stop with the 1990s. According to multiple former associates, Combs allegedly relied on financial pressure, legal attrition, and fear to keep people quiet. Lawsuits were buried under legal fees. Accusers were isolated. Industry figures stayed silent because speaking out meant losing access, income, or protection. Even jurors in a recent case admitted struggling to separate the man on trial from the cultural icon who shaped their youth, despite video evidence of alleged violence. That's not coincidence. That's branding as armor. What's different now is that the armor is cracking. Sponsors are distancing themselves. Artists are cutting ties. Former insiders are lawyering up. The silence from Combs's inner circle has grown louder than any denial. And the most telling reaction of all? His legal team hasn't publicly denied the Shakur threat. Because this moment isn't just about what Combs is accused of doing decades ago, it's about what he's alleged to have built. A system where money-controlled narratives, fear-enforced loyalty, and violence, real or implied, became leverage long after the headlines faded. Systems like that don't collapse all at once. They fail, domino by domino. The Otis filing is one. The financial movements are another. Keefe D's testimony may be the next, and when the dust finally settles, the biggest question won't be whether one man falls. It will be how many people knew and chose silence anyway. Because in an industry built on stories, the most dangerous moment is when someone else finally gets to tell yours. This isn't over. Not even close. If you want a shorter viral version, a YouTube documentary script, a cold, journalistic rewrite, or a more aggressive, cinematic cut, say less. Here's more expose, pushing deeper without crossing into claims stated as fact. Same dark investigative tone, sharper pressure, new angles. This reads like the next chapter of the same piece. What's being exposed now isn't just...
So let's talk about it, man. So you feel like it was bigger than Orlando shooter Pac. You feel like it's more to the story. You don't think it was that simple?
I feel like it's big.
Dwayne Keefe D. Davis has already talked. Steve Otis has filed under oath. Kirk Burroughs is suing again. Others are lawyering up, not to attack, but to protect themselves before someone else talks first. Because once the first domino falls, cooperation becomes currency. The final exposure won't come from a documentary or a lawsuit. It will come from corroboration. Multiple people telling overlapping versions of the same story. Different rooms, different years, same tactics. That's when systems collapse. And that's why the silence from Combs's camp is so telling. No aggressive denials, no counter-narrative, no confident press blitz, just containment, damage control, waiting. But waiting only works when time is on your side. Right now, it isn't. The question looming over all of this isn't whether Combs's legacy survives. That's already answered. The question is whether the industry that enabled him will finally be forced to account for its role, or whether it will do what it's always done best. Because if there's one thing this story keeps proving, it's that power doesn't disappear when exposed. It just looks for somewhere else to hide. And the people who know where it's buried, they're starting to talk. If you want, I can go even darker and more conspiratorial, add a money trail deep dive, write this as a Netflix-style episode narration, or turn it into a Part 3 cliffhanger. Just tell me how far you want to push it. All right, pushing further, but staying disciplined. Allegations only, sources framed, no statements of fact. This is the deep system expose layer, where motive, method, and opportunity intersect without crossing the legal line. What's surfacing now isn't just testimony, it's alignment. Because when separate allegations, filed years apart by people with no shared incentive, begin to echo the same themes, money as leverage, fear as enforcement, silence as currency, the story stops being about credibility and starts being about architecture. And architecture leaves fingerprints. 1.
I think that they don't want, if they was in any of those freak-off tapes, if they played a part in any of those Diddy sessions, they don't want it to get out to the general public to make a...
And when fear is normalized, it becomes self-policing. People censor themselves preemptively. They tell themselves it's not worth it. They convince themselves the truth will come out later. Later is now. What makes this moment different isn't outrage, it's corroboration risk. Steve Otis's sworn statement matters not because it proves anything on its own, but because it introduces a phrase that ties together decades of speculation, prior interviews, and unresolved cases. The phrase doesn't accuse, it implies. And implication, in legal terms, is dangerous when it matches existing testimony, especially when the person allegedly referenced, Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, is set to testify under oath, especially when financial records are under scrutiny, especially when former insiders are resurfacing with documentation. This is how narratives collapse, not through revelation, but through convergence. And convergence is hard to contain. If even a fraction of what's alleged gains traction in court, the implications expand outward. Questions shift from what happened to who knew, from who ordered to who enabled, from who committed acts to who looked away while benefiting. That's when institutions panic. Because individuals can be sacrificed. Systems cannot. The industry now faces an impossible choice: distance itself fully and risk exposure of complicity, or quietly weather the storm and hope public attention moves on. Historically, it chooses the latter. But this time, attention isn't the threat. Bank movements, journals, prior interviews, sworn statements, trial transcripts. Each one reduces deniability. Each one narrows the space between allegation and accountability. And here's the most uncomfortable truth of all. If these allegations had surfaced in isolation, they might have been buried again. But they didn't. They surfaced together, in sequence, with timing that suggests not coordination, but inevitability. That's what happens when a system runs out of places to hide its secrets. The next phase...
Let me ask you, do you think this trial is going to be the end of the story?
I have no idea.
Okay.
But it's a start. You know, my brother was legend. His was legend.
All right, we're going even deeper now. Expose, extended cut. Same rules, discipline language, alleged, according to filings claimed by associates. But the pressure keeps rising. This is the layer that makes people uncomfortable, because it stops being about one man and starts being about how power actually works. At this stage, the story stops being linear and starts becoming circular, because every new allegation doesn't just add weight, it loops back and reinforces what was already there. Different years, different cities, different people, same methods, same outcomes. That's how systems reveal themselves. One of the most overlooked elements in the Combs narrative is how rarely he needed to act directly. According to multiple former associates, his real power wasn't in orders, it was in implication. People didn't need to be told what would happen if they crossed him. They'd already seen it happen to someone else. Careers stalled without explanation. Deals evaporated mid-negotiation. Longtime collaborators suddenly became difficult to work with in the press. None of it traceable to a single decision. All of it effective. This is what sociologists call diffused enforcement. Control maintained not by constant punishment, but by the memory of punishment. And memory lasts longer than fear. That's why the alleged Shakur reference matters so much. If true, it wasn't meant to introduce fear. It was meant to activate it, to remind, to signal that consequences didn't expire with time or headlines. It also reframes decades of silence, because silence doesn't always mean innocence. Sometimes it means equilibrium. As long as everyone benefits, or believes they will, the system holds. But when the balance shifts, silence becomes a liability. That shift is happening now. The arrests, lawsuits, and asset movements didn't just weaken Combs's position. They disrupted the incentives of everyone around him. People who once stayed quiet because speaking meant destruction are now reassessing because
taking on the responsibility of it. Like, there being the truth, he's not going to be afraid to, like, 50 will just let my story be my story and not be afraid to change it.
But there are also some people that feel or want to know, and how do you respond to people who say that it's more about the disdain that you have for Sean Combs than it is for giving the...
Because silence could mean implication. That's a dangerous pivot, especially when Discovery enters the picture. Discovery doesn't care about legacy. It doesn't care about culture. It doesn't care about nostalgia. It cares about emails, bank transfers, calendars, travel records, phone logs, third-party intermediaries, the boring stuff, the stuff that never lies emotionally. And boredom is lethal to myths. If even a fraction of what former insiders claim is accurate, Discovery becomes a minefield, because systems built on informal power always underestimate formal processes. They assume discretion will protect them the way it always has. But courts don't operate on reverence. They operate on corroboration. That's why February matters so much. Not because one man testifying can rewrite history, but because testimony invites counter-testimony. It opens doors. It forces responses. It creates records that can't be quietly corrected later. And once names start appearing in transcripts, the question stops being who did what and becomes who was present. Presence is harder to deny than intent. Which brings us to the industry's quiet panic. Executives who once spoke confidently about separating art from artist are now avoiding the topic entirely. Former collaborators are issuing statements crafted by attorneys, not publicists. Silence has replaced dismissal. That's not moral growth, that's risk management. Because the most dangerous outcome for institutions isn't that Combs is found guilty of anything, it's that patterns become undeniable, that courts, journalists, and the public start asking why warning signs were ignored, settlements normalized, and behavior quietly rerouted instead of confronted. That's when the spotlight widens. And widened spotlights don't just illuminate the center, they catch the edges, the enablers, the fixers, the people who handled things, the ones whose names never appeared on album covers but appeared everywhere else. Those are the people watching this most closely.
Chaotic. It's hard to actually figure out what's what, but it's becoming clearer. It's becoming clearer and clearer,
And when fear is normalized, it becomes self-policing. People censor themselves preemptively. They tell themselves it's not worth it. They convince themselves the truth will come out later. Later is now. What makes this moment different isn't outrage. It's corroboration risk. Steve Otis's sworn statement matters not because it proves anything on its own, but because it introduces a phrase that ties together decades of speculation, prior interviews, and unresolved cases. The phrase doesn't accuse, it implies. And implication, in legal terms, is dangerous when it matches existing testimony, especially when the person allegedly referenced, Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, is set to testify under oath, especially when financial records are under scrutiny, especially when former insiders are resurfacing with documentation. This is how narratives collapse, not through revelation, but through convergence. And convergence is hard to contain. If even a fraction of what's alleged gains traction in court, the implications expand outward. Questions shift from what happened to who knew, from who ordered to who enabled, from who committed acts to who looked away while benefiting. That's when institutions panic. Because individuals can be sacrificed. Systems cannot. The industry now faces an impossible choice: distance itself fully and risk exposure of complicity, or quietly weather the storm and hope public attention moves on. Historically, it chooses the latter. But this time, attention isn't the threat. Bank movements, journals, prior interviews, sworn statements, trial transcripts. Each one reduces deniability. Each one narrows the space between allegation and accountability. And here's the most uncomfortable truth of all. If these allegations had surfaced in isolation, they might have been buried again. But they didn't. They surfaced together, in sequence, with timing that suggests not coordination, but inevitability. That's what happens when a system runs out of places to hide its secrets. The next phase...
With the series, with the film.
I mean, I think the intention is to give a more full-bodied experience to what happened, you know, from the people that agreed to sit down and to participate. And I feel like the film asks a lot of questions, you know, maybe more questions are asked than answers given.